Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you back to my channel. Welcome you back to my story, Awakening into the Void. Um, this story, so far, the retelling of this story has been very therapeutic. I've gotten to the point where I have to start taking notes so that I can tell the sequence right because the sequence is very important. Um, Time, like when, not so much, but the sequence is very important. Um, because I'm introducing to you all the stages of awakening that I went through over the years. So, where I last left off, I had started this job, this warehouse job in the fashion industry, and was making decent money, working full time, just back into hustle mode. So um, it was a distraction from my previous goals as far as working on my artwork and working on my art business. So my um, to me, what that represents is my sovereignty, my freedom, my ability to um, earn income on my own without having to have an employer, without having to work under somebody, help somebody else get rich. I truly believe that, you know, there was a way that I can, I have skills and abilities. You know, I I can provide a service on my own and I can earn cash without having somebody sitting up above me. So back in the work world, it's like, it's so easy once you get a job and you get the paycheck. It's easy, especially if your job isn't too, mentally strenuous. You go in, do the job that they trained you to do, go back home. They pay you once every couple weeks or once a week or however your job does it. And it's that easy. You have your money to pay your rent, your bills. And for me, the job was a decent job, especially in that town. And so I was earning a decent wage to a decent living wage. So it was good. But since I was working full time, it took up all of my time. And the more hours we commit to something that has nothing to do with our life path or our purpose, the more time spent we are distracted from tapping into who we really are as in this human experience. So I fell back into that mode, and I was working there for a little while living with my mom, trying to save money so that I could move out with my friends. And the significance of not only moving back home with my mom, but moving back to this area in this particular town was great because one of the reasons I left to San Diego was to escape that town. And I actually had intentions to make my way down to Mexico, but I think was um, I was burdened by fear while in San Diego. I felt that if I went to Mexico, I wouldn't come home for whatever reason. I just heard a lot of, you know, sketchy stories about the border and the border town Tijuana, and basically any border city, there's going to be some, sketchy activity. Um, so I just never felt brave enough to hop over and go do that. So I felt like being in San Diego was the closest thing to Mexico that I was gonna do for that time period. um, but the main reason I left was to leave the lifestyle and the um, basically the vibe of the town that I was living in. So the the vibe of that town was sex, drugs, alcohol, rock and roll, whatever you want to call it. Um, it's a college town, and that prides themselves in the partying aspect, you know. And that town has been known to turn a lot of people out. And what I mean by that is, you know, a college freshman will get their innocent, you know, intention to go to school and, you know, become a psychologist or whatever their, you know, psychology seems to be the number one thing people people were going to school for, at least at that time. And so they go, and then they, you know, have one semester in the school, get totally caught up in the party world and the drinking and the, you know, cocaine was a big one for a lot of people, but mainly it's just the hookup culture and the drinking. And this, a lot of these kids wouldn't even make it through the whole year. You know, like after the first semester, they have to go home because they're now addicts, or you know, they just completely failed all of their classes and they were there on scholarship and now they screwed themselves, you know. I've seen people just completely change. Their personalities completely change. Like people come there, it's really sweet, you know, really awesome people, and then they, after a few years living there, they become jaded and awful and take advantage of men or women, um, you know, fall into the drug or sex, you know, hookup culture and all of that stuff and just become cold hearted people. So I know that living in that town for, what was it? It was like 3 years before I left to San Diego. Living there definitely put a stain on me to a degree. Like it definitely made me jaded. I had some, I got caught up in that world, the partying, the drinking, the drugs, the hookup culture, and knowing in my heart that I just knew that I had purpose, and I knew in order to break that cycle of all of that partying and drinking and just living with no direction or purpose, I knew I had to break that cycle by starting over somewhere else. So that was my purpose of going to San Diego, was to try to, you know, try to create a catalyst of change in some way in my life, you know. And I am just that type of person. Like I like change. I like, you know, newness. I also like to, I like challenges, and I like to experience uh, places and people and new things that are, you know, on a whim, you know. So moving to a new city is, I didn't realize it was such a big deal until I did it. But um, I did have a lot of experiences. It did change me in a lot of ways. And so when I moved back to Chico, um, it was a interesting experience. It was like moving back in time. Um, it was like regressing in age, shall I say. And so I had to, I just had to adapt. You know, I had no other choice but to adapt. So I'm just working this job, and that's the only place my mind is not, you know, thinking about where I've been and why I've been there, or what I'm going to do next and how I'm going to maintain this business, these business goals, and none of that. It's just like money, place to live, connect with friends. You know, you got to have it's like the basic survival, you know, you just gotta have your income, roof over your head, and your tribe, you know. So business was the last thing on my mind because still with not having a strong sense of self, my tribe was very important to me. And so um, that was my focus. Um, and the idea of staying disciplined in the sense of not getting back into the drinking and the partying, that was just like back burner too, you know. I think I was happy and excited to be around my old friends again, and to have the chance to rekindle those friendships or reignite those friendships. And you know, this particular friend group, we hadn't been around each other since high school, so it was nice to, you know, have that come back around. But this friend group too, we did a lot of partying and drinking together, so coming back into that space, I had to reintegrate into that kind of world of the going out every weekend, and the consumption of alcohol all the time and all of that. So it was interesting, as I said before. um, so I said in the previous video that when I started working at this warehouse, I had met this really unique, interesting girl, and I just thought she was so cool because she was marching to the beat of her own drum. And I've always been somebody like that. I've always just been pretty independent, but at the same time, I'm really friendly and I love to connect with people. But I'm just different. I'm odd. Like, I've always been like into art and worldly things, just cultures and just stuff, I guess, that isn't mainstream due to my parents being kind of eccentric people themselves. Um, and even in high school, you know, like it was easy to slip into that world of like drinking and being a misfit and partying and all that because, again, I didn't fit in with most of my peers. Um, Culture was very important to me, African culture, um, due to my background. And I was going to high school in a hick town, you know, in Northern California. So it just, you know, from coming from San Francisco too, so it was stifling in a lot of ways, you know. And because I didn't get support in my artistic endeavors and my artistic abilities, I wasn't pushed, I wasn't encouraged, I wasn't cultivated in those areas. So I choose rebellion because I'm not being seen, or my gifts aren't being cultivated, you know. So in those spaces, you just kind of gain that fuck it kind of attitude. Excuse my language. Um, so I came from that of just, you know, very strict and, you know, emotionally cut off parents, you know, who were just focused on work and hustling and getting the next paycheck or getting the next rent covered, whatever they had to worry about. So I was on my own in a lot of senses. And just the way I thought was different than people my age. You know, I was interested in the news and interested in what was going on in our government and stuff like that. And I know for me and a lot of people in this world that 9/11 was a massive cracking consciousness, a massive awakening, because for a lot of people, um, it raised a lot of questions for me immediately. That it didn't take any time before I was like, this is odd. Like, there's something very fishy about this. Like, that was immediate natural reaction that I had about this event that affected the entire world. So um, that was kind of the real real beginning of like breaking me open to question life, question this reality, question those who are our leaders, you know. um, so I've always thought like that for a long time, and my peers are just kind of like drinking, alcohol, prom, football, blah blah blah, sports, all the just nonsense that I don't care much about, you know. So, but I still had to conform because humans, we need our tribes. You know, it's hard to just roll solo all the time. Not that people don't do it, but it's not easy. Like in me being a naturally social person, it was, it felt like I have to conform if I want to have friends type stuff, you know. So I tried, you know, I was myself as much as I could be, but over time it got tampered down or just kind of like shaved off, or I shaved off more parts of how I like to project myself before, because of me shaming myself, feeling shame from the outside world for being too political or too contrary to the status quo, asking too many questions, too you know, vibe killer for bringing up, you know, tough topics to talk about, debating a lot, you know. It's just people weren't into that. And so I kind of, you know, slowly shut down that side of myself. So um, and not really having many people to vibe with about these kinds of things like conspiracies and stuff like that. My mom, she was probably the only one that I could like. I definitely get this from my mother. She's a very in tune person, and I'm grateful for that. You know, if it wasn't for my mom and my dad being um, very well read, very off the cuff, very independent. They don't follow the crowd. They don't follow um, the mainstream media, even dietary ways. Like we always ate very healthy. I grew up um, mostly vegan. um, so I was lucky in that way. Uh, and my mom instilled in me to be a critical thinker and to always question anything. My dad did too, absolutely. He used to always tell me that everything you see on the TV is Hollywood. You know, all of these, it's all fake. It's all display. You know, even it, and it's good to have that in the back of your mind because it keeps you in a state of discernment. You're always checking like, well, like remember that your thought is your own, your thought is free, and just because a screen tells you something, just because a person tells you something, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It's really important to check with ourselves, and so that's why I'm getting into this spiritual awakening, because as I further break things down, you will learn, or I will explain how I became in tune with my intuition and being able to discern these sorts of things. So, um, yeah, it was hard growing up and being social and being my true self, which is a truth seeker. Truth seeker. Always wanting to know why. Why what? Why everything? Why everything? I'm always asking why. And and with the grace of the internet and the World Wide Web, we've been giving this awesome tool to begin answering, or at least attempting to answer those questions. But getting completely off track. um, So yeah, back to the warehouse and meeting this girl. It was a special thing to meet someone like her because she reminded me of myself in a lot of the ways of just this, off the cuff person, not conforming to societal's expectations, especially that warehouse, because it was very cult like. It's like if you don't conform, you're gonna get, weeded out somehow, whether through shame or through whatever their tactics are of that. But she worked hard, she hustled, and she was in and out and did her thing. And so she and I got to talking, and I made a point to try to have a friendship with this girl, and one day we were talking, and she was telling me about the stuff that she's into, how she's into doing this like healing work, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, tell me about it, because I've I'm always interested in new things, and especially when it comes to that, like a realm and world that I really don't know much about. So I was like, tell me what you're doing, and she said, oh, I'm doing something called tapping, and the other name for it is the emotional freedom technique. Um, EFT. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And the reason that was so crazy was because, like, maybe a week or 2 weeks prior to that, my mother and I were taking a walk in the park, and she told me a story about this man whose wife was dying, and or she was like manic depressant or something like, it was just, her state was very detrimental to their marriage. And this man started tapping on certain meridians on her body, and she started to heal from her depression and her ailments. And it was just miraculous, absolutely miraculous. So when my mom told me about that, for whatever reason, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know why, but it just makes sense. Like, that's really interesting, and I wanted to know more about it. So then to run into this girl, it was just like, that I'm working with, and she's telling me, oh yeah, I'm doing this tapping stuff. It was like, okay, and I was energetically drawn to her too. So it was just really interesting. It's like, okay, something is happening. And again, I still wasn't aware of it at that time, like maybe to a small degree, but it still was just like, going over my head. But that was amazing. That was an amazing connection, and I will continue in the next video. I hope you are enjoying my story, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.